Welcome back. All right, so in my continuing look at teams in the off seasons they've had so far, I want to talk about the Oilers. Did double check to make sure I've not talked about the Oilers as of yet. The Edmonton Oilers, of course, got all the way to the Stanley Cup final. First time that's happened in a long time, and it feels like we're now looking at an Oilers team that is having the best run of success they've had since the days of Gretzky, really. They had some good stretches in the late '90s where as underdogs they were kind of fun to watch, but this is the first time in a long time they've been relevant for this long. So they don't have a first or second round pick in 2025. And that's worth noting because they don't have any cap space. And of course, in order to free up some cap space, frequently now teams are having to give up draft picks, usually high ones, in order to get that cap space. Now, they are favorites to win the Stanley Cup in 2025. And by favorites, I mean everything I've looked at, they're the number one favorite. Now, that means people are betting on them. It doesn't mean that that's what sites are necessarily setting. It just means that's where most people are putting their votes. This past season, Carolina was a favorite through a lot of the season. So it doesn't necessarily mean Edmonton wins, but they're still viewed as a contender, and they should be when we look at the roster, which we will in a minute. So when we look at this run, they've made the playoffs 5 years in a row, technically. And I say technically because 2020 they lost in the qualifying round, but they're still playoff stats. So they lost in 4 games against Chicago, 3-1, which was an upset by Chicago. And there was a lot of discussion of, see, the Oilers, they aren't built for the playoffs. 2021 also did them no favors. They got swept in the first round by Winnipeg. So that narrative was out there. They can't win with McDavid. They're not going to. They have to have a better team. Depth's not there. 2022, they got all the way to the conference final. However, they get swept in that conference final by Colorado. So then you can get into the discussion of, well, yeah, they got to the conference final, but that's the Pacific, and the Pacific Division's weak, yada, yada, yada. 2023, they get to the second round. They lose against Vegas in 6. And then this year, of course, they get all the way to the Stanley Cup final and lose in 7 games against Florida. So they haven't been swept the last couple of years, and the last 3 years they've lost in the playoffs to a team that went on to win the Stanley Cup. So, I mean, it's solace of sorts, I guess. It doesn't make fans feel better, though, when your team loses to a team that then you see hold up the Stanley Cup, especially if the series is close. You feel like, man, if things had just fallen a little bit differently, who knows? The last time this team made the playoffs 5 years in a row was 1997 through 2001. So it's been a while. It's been a while since the Oilers were relevant for this long, and it's nice to see because the Oilers went through a decade where they just couldn't make the playoffs. They were an absolute disaster, and no matter how many number one draft picks they had, it just didn't seem to get better until they started building their roster better. So again, they're currently over the cap, and we'll talk about it a bit. There's a few contracts I wanted to talk about. So the top 6, in all likelihood, and they have a lot of options with the top 6. So I just went with the depth chart that's on Daily Faceoff's website. Nugent Hopkins this past season had 18 goals, 49 assists, 67 points in 80 games. I didn't expect him to hit 100 points again. 67's too low. I think that's going to come back up a little bit for Nugent Hopkins this year, especially if he is on that top line with McDavid for the whole season. McDavid played 76 games, 32 goals, 100 assists, 132 points. McDavid, one of the best players in the game, if not the best player in the game, and that's a whole discussion we can have another time. But $12.5 million cap hit for McDavid for 2 more years, and then he's very likely going to get a raise. And with where the salary cap is headed, it could be a substantial raise above that $12.5 million cap hit. Zach Hyman's $5.5 million cap hit until 2028. At the time that contract was signed, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not it was going to age poorly. So far, it has not. He played 80 games this past season, 54 goals, 23 assists, 77 points. Fantastic season for Zach Hyman. The addition of Jeff Skinner is going to be interesting to watch because he played 74 games with Buffalo this past season, had 24 goals, 22 assists, 46 points. If he can produce like that in Edmonton, they will be very happy with his addition. Leon Draisaitl, who I think is better off being on that second line rather than being on the same line as McDavid because you want to have 2 really good scoring lines. He has an $8.5 million cap hit for 1 more year, and then he's an unrestricted free agent. But 81 games, 41 goals, 65 assists, 106 points for Draisaitl. I do think Draisaitl comes to an agreement with the Oilers. I also do believe it's going to be well over $10 million for the cap hit. It'll be interesting to see what that contract looks like because, of course, then McDavid's going to end up making more than Draisaitl, so it could get really expensive really quickly here. Victor Arvidsson, added from LA. One thing to keep in mind with Arvidsson, he only played 18 games this past season. 6 goals, 9 assists, 15 points. Arvidsson's issue over the years has been staying healthy. It's not his effort. It's not his talent. The effort, the talent are there, but he does get injured a lot. Now, the good news for the Oilers is that having Arvidsson in your lineup is great, and they have some depth here. So Holloway, who I thought had a good run in the playoffs, 38 games last year, 6 goals, 3 assists, 9 points. Could jump into a top 6 role at some point this year. And Adam Henrique really gives them that depth down the middle. 82 games, 24 goals, 27 assists, 51 points. One thing you need if you're going to win the Stanley Cup is depth at the center position. Depth on the blue line is key as well, but yeah, you need that 1 through 4 down the middle. Preferably 1 through 5, that one of your wingers can jump into the middle as well. And then there's the case of Evander Kane and the discussion of what's going to happen with Kane. So he has a $5.13 million cap hit for 2 more years. He played 77 games this past season, 24 goals, 20 assists, 44 points. And I think the Oilers would like to move him for cap space. And I think that moving Kane's contract is easier said than done. Kane also dealing with a hip issue, which he's going to try to make sure doesn't need surgery. But in the event that he does need surgery, and in the event that to start the season he ends up on LTIR, that solves the over-the-cap problem. So we'll see what happens with Evander Kane. I think bringing in Skinner, bringing in Arvidsson may mean that maybe they're banking on Kane not starting the season, and that's why they're adding more top 6 wingers. But I think this is the best their top 6 has looked over the last, 20 years? I think this is it. I do. And the fact that you can still talk about other guys who could jump into the top 6, like Kane, like Henrique, I think that tells you just the kind of depth that's there. Now, the blue line generates a lot of discussion. Sometimes fair, sometimes unfair. Ekholm had an amazing season, $6 million cap hit for him, 79 games, 11 goals, 34 assists, 45 points. I don't necessarily expect him to score 45 points again, but we know he's going to bring the effort, and he's a really, really good defensive defenseman too. So he's fantastic. And Evan Bouchard, who has a $3.9 million cap hit until next summer when he's a restricted free agent, the sooner the Oilers sit down and talk to him, the better. 81 games, 18 goals, 64 assists, 82 points. If they don't get him signed before the season and he gets off to a really strong start offensively, Bouchard's going to be so expensive to keep. So I don't think that holding off would make sense. I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying that there's that way you can look at it as a GM and say, all right, well, he's going to want, say, 10 million. He's going to want 10 million, but I don't think he's going to produce this year like he did last year. So when he gets off to a slower start, maybe we can start having a negotiation, right? There's those tactics you have to employ here as to when the best time is to engage. And with Bouchard, I think it's now, because I do think he's going to have another really strong offensive season, and the stronger that start, the more money it's going to cost them. So we'll see what happens. Darnell Nurse, a lot of discussion about Nurse's contract, and rightfully so. $9.25 million cap hit till 2030. Might make it tough to get Bouchard to accept a contract in, say, the $6 or $7 million range, right? 81 games for Nurse this past season, 10 goals, 22 assists, 32 points. And Nurse, I think, is a good defenseman, but it's a bad contract. And so that's going to magnify mistakes made by Nurse. Broberg, he's a restricted free agent currently. He had a good run in the playoffs. Only played 12 regular season games with Edmonton, though, and 2 assists. Can he keep it up over a full 82-game season? We haven't seen that yet at the NHL level. How much is it worth? And for how long? I would think Broberg probably gets a 2-year extension. Probably $2.5 million cap hit. Remember, they are currently over the cap, so that makes things very difficult for Jeff Jackson and the Oilers. The tandem, thankfully cheap. Skinner, $2.6 million cap hit for 2 more years. He was 36, 16, and 5, 905 save percentage. What's interesting with Skinner is I don't know that I've ever seen a goaltender who can alternate looking really bad one night and looking really good the next as much as Skinner. Just that, like, we talk about the goaltenders and how unpredictable they are. Skinner just seems to take that to another level. But in the playoffs, the first 3 games of a series, no. But after that, games 4 and beyond, he was fantastic. So, yeah, I mean, if Skinner can find consistency in his game, he could be one of the top 10 goalies in the league. Calvin Pickard has a $1 million cap hit for 2 years, the extension he signed with the team. 12-7-1 record, 909 save percentage. Pickard's a good backup. I'm glad he's finally getting another chance in the NHL. It feels like it took a long time. They went 3-9-1 under Woodcroft before they made the change to Knobloch. Knobloch 46-18-5 after taking over, and of course the run to the Stanley Cup final as well. That will definitely ensure that even if they have a slow start this year, like if they started 3-9-1 this year, Knobloch's not going anywhere. So he's definitely earned himself some job security for at least, I would say, a season and a half. But you never know what the National Hockey League thinks can change quickly. The search for general manager is almost done. Jeff Jackson, it sounds like, is narrowing it down to two. The most likely ones out there seem to be Mark Hunter, and I think he's the front runner. I'd be kind of surprised if Mark Hunter doesn't get it. But Jason Botterill's name has been coming up. Now, of course, he's been an assistant GM with the Seattle Kraken, and prior to that, he was a general manager in Buffalo. Sabres fans are going to probably do a bit of a double take hearing Botterill's name brought up. But yeah, it can work. And for anybody who wants to say, well, Botterill wasn't good in Buffalo, yada yada, Don Waddell had a tough time in Atlanta, and then he had a pretty good run in Carolina. So it can depend on the franchise, it can depend on who's working with you and all that fun stuff. So that hire is likely to happen in the next 2 weeks, and there's discussions that Stan Bowman may join the Oilers organization as an advisor to the general manager, which might make Blackhawks fans think, wait, what? So if they go with Bowman and overseeing Botterill, I would expect some comments. Make them creative too. You got some time before the hirings take place, but yeah, I don't know that I personally, if I was looking for an advisor to a general manager, would necessarily bring in Bowman, considering his last couple of years as a general manager too, but the Oilers are looking to do things, I guess, a little bit different. We'll see what they end up doing. I do hope it's Mark Hunter. I'd like to see Mark Hunter take over. And I'm not sure that he would need an advisor unless it's like, Scotty Bowman, somebody like that. But we'll see what they do. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Who would you like to see as the next general manager of the Oilers? And can they win the Stanley Cup in 2025? I think they can. I absolutely think they can. I think they saw what they need to do. I think that once they got to game 4 of that series, they started to click. They played their game. When you're down 3-0 to start with, you've really put yourself up against it, and the odds of completing that comeback are not great. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.